Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the It's Just Not Your Day podcast with me, Templeshot, and my friend here, Drayton.
Hello.
So, this podcast is designed to share stories and opinions, featuring a notable guest each episode where we discuss specific topics, but also have a free-flowing discussion about CB in general. So this first episode will be on the veteran experience with special guest Evo Loz Gaming, who I'm sure you all know is one of the most recognisable content creators for ConquerorsBlade. Evo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, I'm Evo Loz Gaming, doing some variable quality YouTube videos, but been around for an awfully long time, unfortunately, in this game, so share some sort of experiences, a few stories about the game with you today.
The aim of this one is to discuss the veteran experience, and I think to begin that, we need to really define what a veteran is. What do we think? Any initial ideas?
Well, I thought I might kick off with a little bit of a story, actually, maybe. Just to take you back, a little bit of an experience I had with Temple way back October 2019. This is before the seasons even started. So season 1 hadn't even happened yet, and Territory Wars was pre-season. So for a long series of reasons, I started a small little house at the time, just focused on basically training up new players. It all got a little bit carried away, and we ended up actually owning a bit of a land in an alliance called Ashen Phoenix. And through a sort of long series of events, it all went a bit wrong. All got a little bit heated, should we say, and ended up splitting up. And I got a very strongly worded talking to from Temple as we tried to work it out.
Me?
Yeah.
I would never do such a thing.
Heaven forbid.
Oh, those were the fun times, weren't they?
It was. How different was Territory Wars back then, Temple? It was so different, wasn't it?
It was insane. I mean, obviously that was before the seasons, right? So there was no capital to fight over, but that was just the entire server fighting each other, basically. There was coalitions of, I mean, I was on the south side of like 30 houses, maybe, if not more. And the alliance meetings for that were horrendous, the Diplo meetings. Because I was in a small house called End Raiders at the time. There was like 20, 30 of us in there, maybe. But for some reason, we ended up taking over control of the calls. So it was me and Darkbread at the time. I think I saw him in game the other day, actually, so I think he's come back to play a little bit. But yeah, it ended up being the two of us just leading these Diplo calls with all these people in there from all different areas, Spanish, German, French, all these players trying to organize it. We were in there for sometimes up to like 6 or 7 hours in these Diplo calls. It was insane. Just having the entire Borderlands fight each other.
It was
pre-season. Was pre-season just Borderlands? It was like there were no other Angliang.
No, it was the whole map.
It was all. Yeah, it was the whole map.
Yeah, it was everything. Yeah. So I when I first started, I started out in Angliang, in that region and ended up just meeting these like 5 or 6 guys that was in Tusken Raiders at the time. Then we ended up pairing up with Piratan Pact, who are one of the biggest houses at the start of the game. Because of course there was a lot of Germans to start with, because there was that one big German streamer that got everybody into the game. Basically, there was such a large German population at the start. But we ended up following Piratan Pact over to Orgolia, where we were fighting there. Then we went down to Dai Cheng a couple of weeks later, and we were fighting there. And then we moved into the Borderlands to join up with ODT, with a main alliance then, fighting against... what was Eden's house before they became Eden? I can't remember the name now. That's bad. My mind's gone completely blank.
I'm sure someone will remind you in the comments.
I'm sure plenty of you will remind me. The Center will be screaming at me, because Center knows, because I've been with Center for a very long time. But he knows that I'm awful at names of players and remembering people and stuff like that. So he's always like, yeah, that was this person that did this, and this. And I'm like, oh yeah, it was that guy. So
you've obviously been playing since pre-season, which is a hell of a long time ago. What is longevity something that we say defines a veteran with this? Is it something that, you've been playing for a X number of seasons, therefore you're a veteran? I don't know if that is personally. I feel like it more comes into experience rather than just how long you've been playing.
Yeah, it's got to be a combination of things, I think, probably. Yeah. I mean, I think it's safe to say, I don't think it can purely be skill-based, for example. I mean, I've been playing this game since beta. I'm still a pretty bad player. I'm certainly, when you compare, say, maybe to Temple, who's doing some of the CBL stuff, there's definitely, there's a clear, distinct gap in skill there.
But even then, I wouldn't say I'm a top-level player. I think, personally, I'm just an above-average level player, but I'm a good tactician.
Right.
Yeah.
So that does make it hard to define, doesn't it? Because it's not, you can't just say you have to have X percentage win rate, or You have to be really good at
Yeah,
certain things
and
because it varies.
Yeah, you can't even say level either, because you look at people like the likes of Amir, for example, who consistently been a very low level player in the game, but one of the, well, if not the best dual blade the game's ever seen. People like Echoes and Aru, who came through into Push or Kick and then into Origin, were originally in Jesters, and I think they were like level 600 or 700 when we picked them up into plebs. Not plebs, sorry, Push or Kick, and like they were top level players at the time. So level is a very difficult. I don't think level's a good way of doing it. But then even if you look at game knowledge, it very, very differs. I mean, we've had some funny stories the last couple of seasons in Origin with Dunkel, top level player, top level shot caller, didn't know you could press I to open your inventory. He always went through the menu up at the top, or going to the billeting officer and accessing it that way. Little things like that, or people didn't know you could zoom out if you're out on the open world to zoom out to the map. Things like that, which you consider basic knowledge, but a lot of these so-called veterans don't know these little things. So it's difficult ones to define.
I didn't know you could control click on the veterancy line to add all the points. I used to.
That's quite
go
new.
through
That was only
each
recently,
individual
to be fair.
one.
Don't feel bad about that one.
Yeah, that was only like 2 seasons ago that came in, I think, because everyone was complaining about it, and they finally added it.
I had no idea until like a few weeks ago, and someone told me. I was like, "Wow, that saves so much time."
It does save so much time, and especially for tournaments. A little crossover there as well, because a lot of the time when you go into these tournaments, if you're using like CBL, for example, where you have the tournament server for it, they give you all the units, and now they just have them automatically top line, and you have the stuff to change them. But originally, they would just be completely unleveled. You have to level every single unit you wanted to play, and it was. Every time you start a tournament, you have to spend like 3 or 4 hours just doing your skills, your units, your unit veterancies, all that kind of stuff. It took forever.
I think personally, it's safe to say hero level is not an indicator of a veteran either, because I've seen players achieve 400 levels in one season, and let's say they're level 1200, they're 3 seasons old. Have they got a decent barracks at that point? Do they have the depth of unit? Are they a single weapon player, like one trick pony, or do they have actual knowledge of how to play other classes and their strengths and weaknesses? I think it's really difficult to define, but if we look at the survey that came out from My Games not too long ago, last week or something, the highest level bracket they gave was 500 plus. Do we consider level 500 to be a veteran if we take that?
I mean, like you said, you can do that in just over a season. Well, you can do it in one season if you play enough. I think a lot of it as well comes down from how well you're known in the community. That defines a veteran to an extent as well. Because if you are known in the community a lot, then that is your presence. That's how people know you. So, oh, it's that person. Yeah, I know him. Whereas if it's someone that could have played from beta that nobody knows, just been sat on the sidelines, maybe in cohorts since beta, no one's going to know who that is.
That's a good point. Yeah, certainly an element of that. It's a combination. It's a combination of time, skill, say notoriety to some extent. It's a combination of that sort of feeds in to sort of trying to define this fairly sort of ambiguous veteran term. But yeah, I agree.
I think that kind of highlights that the use of the word veteran is probably quite poor. It's not a good application of actually what it means. We can't define where it goes. And you talked really like right at the start about how in pre-season it was 30 houses versus 30 houses in a really small or tight compact area where every village was contested. There's been a number of changes since pre-season, and I think if we can now talk about some like the major features that would have just completely diverted how the game was played. My experience, I started at the end of season 3, so Keshigs were just running over everyone, Rattan Rangers were running over everyone, and the first real units that I saw change the game were Falconetti, and how they came in and you went, okay, I now can't land siege towers consistently. In territory wars, particularly in even sieges, you saw those first people have them. It's like, wow, okay, what do I do? Now they're so staple in the game, it's just like, okay, you see them, you kill them, or you dive them, or you change direction because they're too well protected. What are some of the key changes that you've seen over the years? If you can put a time or date on them, that'd be great. But it could be a brand new unit that changes the game, or a patch, or a way in which things have been changed or introduced.
If I can jump in on that, I think one of the biggest changes that ever impacted the game was the change of the experience for units and how fast you can level them. I think that is one of the biggest major changes. I mean, you look at, say, we're talking about pre-season here, you would play for 6 months and still not have a golden unit. Like, I remember when I first started, I was unemployed at the time. I was playing literally all day, non-stop for like 3 or 4 months. But you would still take up to 6 months to unlock a golden unit. And when those first people unlocked Reapers, they were just unstoppable. Nothing. You could charge into a 15-man setup with 1 unit of Reapers and basically wipe it. They were that strong. But to some extent, I think it warranted that because it did take so much effort to unlock them. Not even unlock them, then every level was like 3 million XP, whatever it was, to level it up.
Yeah, to get to
every
level 30.
single level. Like, it was ridiculous. Whereas now, you play for a week or 2 weeks consistently, you'll probably have unlocked a tier 5 from the F4 challenges.
And
So that was a
very different.
huge impact for the game. And also now you've got the XP tokens you can save up to level it instantly as soon as you unlock it as well. So that's a huge thing that changed the game.
Do you think that's a positive change?
Yes and no. I think that personally, I think it's a positive change because it makes it easier for newer players to get into the game. There's a lot of other issues on that we can talk about later. But I think the negative, I think, is that golden units don't feel as impactful as they were before. So you have a lot of time now. The meta, a lot of the time, is tier 4s. You look at dagger axes, for example, how strong they have been for so many seasons now since they got that initial change. Stronger than their tier 5 counterpart, the cataphracts. Cataphracts are only better because they're tankier, but the dagger axes actually deal more damage than the cataphracts. So I just think that tier 5s are less impactful. But that, again, I think comes from booming because they have the leadership doctrine, so they can run more of them.
I think in part as well, they're slightly running it. Tier 5 seems to be more angled towards specific niches almost. So you sort of have the tier 4s are the more general around melee or more general around range, and then you focus into a specific area when you're going into tier 5. And it does make them, sometimes you can end up having pretty bad games with them because unless you hit that little bit thing they're good at, then they don't really perform all that well, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I do think the XP change is overall a positive thing. It was pretty ridiculous. I do remember someone actually left the game because of it. I can't remember what his full name was, Heavy something. And he just spent like 2 months leveling up Hussars, I think it was, to level 30. And then like the day he got to 30, they announced that they're changing the leveling requirements. And he just played Expedition 3s, like 500 Expedition 3s in a row trying to level this stuff.
Because back then that was the best way of getting XP. So you would be doing just an Expedition 3s for hours and hours and hours. I remember working towards, I got Fire Lancers with my first golden unit. And they nerfed them just before I got them. Because they were so strong. Every golden unit back then was so powerful because it took you so long to level up and they were so overtuned compared to everything else. But it needed it. Because I remember just running around when like the whole server only had green units, because that's how long it took to level things up and to unlock things in the tech tree. People would be playing green and blue units in sieges because that's all they had. Nobody had purples.
Yeah, I remember going to territory wars with like Pike Militia.
Yeah, Pike Militia were broken, to be fair. They were broken for a very long time. But I remember going around with like bow riders. Like, I was one of the first people to unlock those. And just running around with those, just killing everything. Or like fire archers when they first came out. Because nothing was fireproof, because no one had any purple or gold units. So everything just burned. And it was just the most broken thing at the time. But no one had any better. And it was so fun back then with that.
I remember one of the first houses I joined was part of the Yogscast sponsorship campaign. And there were 3 Yogcast houses, and they had 300 people online for Territory War. The entire thing was full. This was on EU2. And it was a case of you go in with your Pike Militia, and if you kill 2 monastics, you've done your job. Get out of there. Someone else will take your place. And it was so different from now, where you can get TW ready within 200 levels, I'd say. You can get Imperial Pike Guards.
It's not even that. Like, yes, you need some guidance. You need someone to tell you to get these units. But if you have that guidance, you can get territory ready within a week of playing. Like, literally a week. Because you unlock so many tier 4... There's not even just the tier 4 units, but you get so much free stuff now when you play the game. But that one thing that's still holding everyone back is the seasonal units.
Yeah. Which is an enormous grind. Yeah. Let's talk about seasonal units then. They were first introduced with the Namkhans and Keshik season. How did that kind of change the way you guys played it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm by this point I'm out of Territory Wars now by season 2, I think. But I mean, perhaps just to touch on the Keshiks, my favorite ever YouTube comment was someone talking about Keshiks because obviously they had quite a period of domination and they sort of seemed to crop in and out throughout the seasons then going on. But someone said Keshiks moved so fast they didn't actually render in on his computer screen before he was dead. They could come around the corner, run him over, kill him, and then it would render. I just thought that was absolutely fantastic.
I've had a famous clip from one of my first streams where Hussars did that to me. I could hear Cav coming. I turn around, was like, "Oh, there's nothing there. It's fine." I turn back away from them, and then I get run over by Hussars from that direction. I was like, "What?" You can literally watch in the playback as my face goes.
What?
Because I looked there was nothing coming, and I look back, and then it runs me over and kills me. I was like, "What the hell?" But that was one of my favorite things with Keshigs, right? So this is a good argument on this at the moment, is that they were so strong, yes, but it's very different playing them in territories to playing them in sieges, because in sieges, just no one took counter cav, because you had imp pikes at the time, you had even pike militia at the time would kill Keshigs, but no one played it because everyone wanted to play the fun units at the time, which was the Keshigs and the Namkins and other melee units like that. No one was playing anti-cav, so that's why they were so prolific for so long.
I think touching on that, we do see a lot more anti-cav played now, not necessarily enough, but I think with a wider variety, with 40, which can also be fun anti-infantry as well, so they can fight decently.
Yeah, I think 40s was a very good thing for them to bring to the game, because it was basically an upgraded pike militia, wasn't it? Because at the time we only really had pike militia, halberds, and imp pikes.
Yeah, they were a bit much in season 3. When they actually came out, they were a bit of a nightmare because there was about 5 of them camping on one corner. But they absolutely perfect unit. Same, I think, Medower.
And because they're so cheap as well with the 40s.
Exactly. Yeah, and they're a good workable unit, and they're fun to play.
They very much replaced halberdier sergeants as a defensive pike. Where before your IPGs were the aggressive, advancing over formations and breaking into places. Fortes just were like, right, we're holding the line here. And you also see how the game has changed, where F3 was the go-to formation when Fortes first came out, because they just one-shot anything that ran through them. But now F1 is very much the go-to formation, because we've got the doctrines, we've got new play styles, and people have learned and adapted. But
I think it's also just going on to that point you were saying there before you go forwards. It's part of where people learn to be more aggressive in the game. With your hero especially, because looking back historically, people were playing more on their units, whereas that's why 40s were so weak in F3 now. Is because basically any hero has one ability, if not more, that can just break that entire formation. So that's why F1 is used so much now, because it's just a spread formation that you cannot open up with just one hero.
So, in terms of unlocking units, how long did it take you guys to unlock Keshigs the first time?
I was very active back then, so I got them quite quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, it must have taken me. It took a long time. I can't remember exactly how long it took back in the day, but yeah, I mean, there's certainly the season challenges back then were longer. I can't remember exactly how many challenges there is on Keshig. It was like 10 separate stages or 8 or something.
I think it was 10 stages on Keshig.
10 stages, yeah.
It's kind of crazy how long. And I think, did you only get them right at the end? Or did they have I don't think they did doctrines in the seasonal challenges back then, did they, in season 2?
I don't think so, no.
So I think, it was very different to how it is now. Nowadays, relatively speaking, if you've got the existing units and you're doing the current season, it's not too bad to unlock. It's just that when you come in as a new player, there's 15 or 14 seasons essentially worth of units to unlock, and it's like, where do you even start?
And most of the time, the current meta units are seasonal units.
Right. Yeah.
So
exactly.
So you do need to unlock them if you want to be competing at that level. Like, you can argue that you can get imp pikes, maybe even palace guards, imp shields, whatever, that you can be useful in territory wars for your team. But if you want to be good at the game, or if you want to be competing at that top level, you need the seasonal units.
Yeah, and a lot of them as well, it's pretty pick and mix, isn't it? Because you might say, oh, I want a Falconetti's, but then, that's the end of a season 3, and then you might want an end of a season 6, or, you're sort of picking and choosing.
Shield Maidens, for example.
Yeah. So what's that, season 7?
Yes. I think
it starts to all merge into one blur, doesn't it? It's kind of hard to remember.
It does. But this, again, we're going to talk about this in future podcasts as well, because we're going to go more in depth on that. But it's like, what can we do to make it easier for that? Because you say, coming into it, you look at it and you go, crap, I've got 14 seasons of units that I need to unlock, and I can only unlock one season at a time. How are you going to get in through that?
But as veterans, realistically, we have every unit unlocked. So when the new stuff comes out, when we are faced with a new season, it's not the worst grind for us.
No, and I think it's a good idea overall, because it gives you a reason to play regularly, because you have to do these challenges. And I think that's a lot of I think that's one of the good things I would say about the game is they are introducing a lot of things, whether it's challenges or whether it's quests or whether it's just game modes that you need to play quite a bit of, so it encourages you to play more of the game. Rather than just, you log in 28 times, you get your rewards kind of thing in the month, whereas now there's some challenge, like for the most recent mode, the Riot Act, which I personally really enjoyed. It was like you had to unlock 20 chests, or you had to free or get so many kills as the guard. So it was encouraging you to play more rather than just logging in, ticking a box, and going off again, which I know a lot of people did do before that.
And we see that a lot in other games. You have to look at War Thunder, World of Tanks, these type of things where they use a similar sort of system, right? Where you have campaigns and quests, long form quests where you have to fulfill certain objectives in battles, etc. So it's a known working thing, and I don't think it's too far of a leap to say that for all the problems, seasonal challenges are probably what keeps the game going financially. I don't think realistically they're necessarily making tons of money off cosmetics. And there has to be a way of
it's me because I spend way too much on cosmetics because I'm trying to put it in a nice way, but I'm just going to say it as is. I'm a skin whore. Like, I love collecting skins. Even though I only ever play the same skin, I only ever use the Plague Doctor skin. I still unlock every single skin I can when it comes out. So, like the most recent one, that was it, a Nibby attire, whatever it was that just came out. I spent like £300 trying to unlock that. I think in the end, because I spent like 55,000 sovereigns or something trying to unlock it. It's ridiculous, but I've got the money to spend on it, so why not? And I think that is one thing. I don't want to be too fickle, but I feel like they do bring out seasonal units to overpower because it encourages people to pay for them because they are a strong unit.
That's definitely why they don't nerf them, I think.
Well, yeah, I think that 100%. I don't want to talk badly about them because it's a business model. At the end of the day, they need to make money from it. Yep. And generally speaking, they're only strong for that season. Then they do balance it towards the end of the season. Then it normally becomes more in line then with the rest of it. I mean, you look at Shield Maidens and Berserkers when they first came out. They did tune those down eventually. I think Berserkers were very strong for a long time, but they do tune them down. They do balance them out. They've got to make some income somewhere. So I don't blame them for doing that.
And then they go back to past units. Let's say take the Keshigs or even Chevaliers. They got slight buffs that then really tipped them over the edge and they became the go-to meta unit.
I mean, you look at Palace Guards. They were irrelevant for a very long time, and then they gave them that one patch, 4 or 5 seasons, and suddenly they were meta again as a 230 cost or 235 cost unit from the unit tree, but suddenly became meta again. You even look at Halberd Sergeants at the moment. They're not like overpowered, but if you play them and if you play them properly, you can do a lot of work with them. Like, I would say the meta currently right now is the most balanced it's ever been. You can play almost anything you want and still get decent scores with it. Yes, there are still meta units that you will do very well with, regardless, like monks, for example, that are very strong, but they do have a counter. There are other units you can play. You can play almost any unit you want to and still be useful on it and still do a good job.
I think the one of the problems I think with balance, since that's kind of the way we're going now, is balance means so many different things to so many different people. And I mean, initially, let's just talk about the My Games version, right? So, because there's definitely balance differences between Frontier and My Games. But if you 100%. Just the My Games, I feel like I sit kind of in this almost middle position as kind of, I would say I'm a veteran player, but I'm not necessarily, I'm still a casual-ish veteran player, right? So you see kind of both sides. So to take the monks, I agree. I think there's reasonable counters to them. They're a pain to deal with, and they are certainly a strong unit, but you can deal with them. But equally, you take then that to go to the other end on the more casual side. You take someone who, say, maybe plays an hour and a half at the weekend, works a full-time job, has got 3 kids, whatever. They don't know that. They don't know how to counter them. They log into a battle and they run into 8 of them, and their experience is just every unit they bring, whatever they try and counter, they just get a spinning thing in the face and they're all dead instantly. And so how do you balance that? Do you balance to the veteran players? Do you balance to the sort of lowest common denominator, which is the casual players?
Yeah, but even on top of that as well, do you balance for siege or do you balance for territory war?
Right, yeah. And then
there's so many different aspects to
it. Tournaments, it's a completely different thing again, because you have a different 100%.
Meta. And even on that same regard, you've got the Maul, for example, that everyone cried for so long in all the discords about it, but the grab being broken, blah, 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 blah. And you look at like the top end of the game, so to speak, the top end of the competitive side of it, it wasn't an issue because people can play around it. There are counters to it. There are easy ways to deal with it. And even now at the moment, this past season, we had Maul that got overtuned with the reworks. And I do think it was too strong, but it had big counters. But that then affected the meta. But I think it's also more punishing here because my games, if we're talking my games booming, my games has always typically been a very heavy melee, very heavy shield playstyle. And booming has always been a very heavy spear, very heavy pike, hero killing classes, and cav. And that's been their meta for a very long time. So that's why part of it, things don't get changed as quickly because, if my games are going to booming saying, look, all of our population saying Maul is too strong, booming go to theirs and go, well, no one plays Maul here. We had cases here of like 10 Mauls in a game, so to speak, even more, and booming you'll see maybe 1 Maul per game, maybe 2. Because it's just not played because it just doesn't fit with the meta. So it's also, you've got so many different things that impact this meta. You've got, do you balance it for siege? Do you balance it for territory? Do you balance it for new or veteran? Do you balance for booming or my king? There's so many different aspects to it that it's so difficult for them to get it right on every form.
There's also, do you balance for an individual or do you balance for group play? Because one Maul you can deal with quite easily, but when there's 3 of them piling on top of you,
much harder.
It's even harder. And that's where it kind of, we talk about skill ceiling with the units, and when the latest tier 5 cav came out, I remember looking at it going, this has got a decent skill ceiling on it. Like, you have to time your charge up, you've got to bring them a decent distance, get them into the unit, and then press the buttons at the right time. And then they introduced a doctrine that just removed the kind of need to be careful. You then just pass through every unit you want to and wipe everything. It removed that skill ceiling, or lowered it significantly, that it became so easy to play and easy to be effective. And that's where Maul is very easy to be effective. It's got its counters, but it's easy to be effective in a team play environment with it.
Yeah, I remember saying that myself at the start when I saw the cav as well. It was like, because obviously we had access to the PTR being content creators, so I was like, look, this is a good unit, but it requires skill, it requires timing. You have to hit that one at the right moment. You can beat 40s with them, you can beat anti-cav with them if you hit that one at the right moment. And then, like you said, they brought a doctrine that means that they're, just ignore all that anyway, and now anyone can play it. Which, again, fits their model if they want everyone to play it, but then at the same time, are they going to remove that doctrine at the end of the season? Well, they can't now, because the doctrine's out. So that doctrine's there forever now, right? So how are they going to rebalance that?
And there's also a cost to doing sort of overpowered seasonal units in terms of players leaving the game, right? There's a bit of a balance there. I mean, the one that stands out for me is Axe Raiders, whatever that was, 8 or 9. I can't remember which season that was. And they just absolutely dominated at the time. And there were counters again, but 90% of the player base struggled to effectively use those counters. So most people's experience was just being slaughtered by this one unit that could phase through shields and do everything, and then it got to the other side and just slaughtered everything. So people really struggled to deal with that. And, a lot of players left because it took 2 months to have any sort of balance change because they didn't want to balance what is essentially a paid-for unit. So
it's similar with Fire Lancers when they did the upgrade as well, when they changed the Liao range. They were so broken when they came out, just dominating everything. Territory wars, sieges, everything they were dominating. And they didn't fix it for a while.
No, and how many players do you lose in that time? If you lose 20% of your player base, well, then next season you've either got to market and spend to get that back, or you've got a 20% smaller pool of players who are going to be spending any money on the game. And you sort of, I think it's safe to say that the game isn't exactly growing. And I don't think this necessarily helps. We're getting to the point now where the player population is small enough that we really need to be keeping what we've got as we try and sort of work on building in new players.
I do think part of that is down to the player base itself, though, as well. So there aren't really, I know you were speaking at the start, you had your house that was there to train up new players. There aren't really any houses at the moment on E1 that I can think of that are run by veterans with a good game knowledge that will take in new players and train them up. Like, it's just not a thing in this game.
No, I probably would agree with that, yeah.
But is that because there's not the player base for that anymore?
Or is it just because no one wants to do it? Like, no one wants to lead a house like that.
It's hard.
It's something I wanted to do for a while, but it's difficult with where the player base is at the moment. It's like you see players, either they join this random house that the guy who's leading it is also new and they just sort of figure things out themselves, or they join one of the so-called Borderlands houses, and they're in their own little world thinking they're the best, but then one of the main region houses comes over and they can't do anything. But they themselves will think that they're this incredible house, we hold all this land, we're doing really well. But realistically, on the grand scheme of things, they are not that strong.
It's just a fly on a windscreen, isn't it? It's just
it's like, do we hold the players accountable to that? Well, no one's helping them to level up, no one's helping them to improve, or do we hold the game responsible for that because there isn't the player base there to have as much new blood coming in that will increase the skill base overall?
There's a number of things that got discussed there about keeping players as opposed to losing them. What do we think are the key factors that keep people playing this game?
the main thing I think is it is such a unique game. Like, there isn't really another game out there that is the same as anywhere close to this, and that's why I've been playing for so long, because it is such a unique and fun game when it works, if that makes sense. Like when it's doing what it wants to do, it is such a fun game to play. But then when you have all these overtuned units, when you have, what seems a lot of people have the reaction of, well, my games don't listen to us. Reality, they do. They do take a lot of feedback, but like we've already discussed, their hands are tied a lot of it because they're not the developers,
No.
And even if they were the developers, if you're getting 3 different bits of feedback, which are all in, someone saying ball's overpowered, someone saying it's absolutely not clear, but people just need to learn to play, and someone else is saying I like Spear, then what do you do to that? You get almost diametrically opposed feedback, and you've got 2 versions. That was something I just thought of to not to endlessly circle back on this, so we never get anywhere, but to go back to one of the big changes. One of the sort of more subtle big changes is over the past sort of year or two has been the alignment of patches and unit names between Frontier and the My Games version. We never used to get patches; didn't used to come out at the same time. There used to be like a week lag between. So everyone's trying to log into the Frontier patch notes to see what's probably going to be coming, and then they weren't necessarily always identical. And then all the units had different names. So it's like, who are these, Yangdu shields? What are they actually in our version? You've got to try and translate. So the alignment of those 2 policies, so we get patches at, roughly speaking, the same time, seasons are released at roughly speaking the same time, and the units are called the same, is a really kind of back-end thing that most people probably don't see, but actually it makes a real big difference to the alignment of the 2 versions.
Yeah, I think they do an interview recently with one of the localization guys for My Games that actually did all that stuff and was doing all that translating everything and making sure it fit to the My Games version, which is an interesting read. I mean, it's just, feedback in general. So they used to actually, there's a section in the official Discord for house leads. There's almost no one in there that's active. I think there's like one EU2 guy that posts in there occasionally now. I'm in there, but there's just nothing happens there anymore. They used to do at the end of every season, they would do a session with all the house leads and we'll go through feedback of how would the season go, things we need to change, all that kind of stuff. That hasn't happened for like 3 or 4 seasons now, if not longer. I mean, admittedly, it was Bluntcast that led it all. So now he's moved, maybe that's why. But that was a good session for me because we'd sit in there for half an hour to an hour and just have a frank, just upfront discussion with the CM, direct, face-to-face. And that, while maybe not necessarily everything would be changed from that, it at least showed that they were giving you your time, because I think a lot of people do feel that, like on the Discord, for example, they'll say stuff in there, but is it being listened to? And I think that for a very long time was the opinion of the main population, was that My Games aren't listening. Because there was a lot of issues for a long time back. We're talking like sort of season 5 to 10 now, maybe. And the general feel from the population of the game was, well, no one's listening. And I think it has gotten better now because we have a lot more interactions with the CMs. They do all those streams now and all that kind of stuff, which does show more interaction from them, which I think was a really good thing to do from them. They just have, like, even if it's just Katie just playing for a couple of games, once or twice a week, that still shows their presence. It shows that they're listening. And I think that's really useful.
I think it's a real big frustration I've always had, and it's not and like I don't want to just turn into a criticism of My Games because they do a lot well. But one thing that I've always found very frustrating, well, for the whole sort of 3 or 4 years now I've been here, is this sort of idea sometimes that when things go wrong or something's not quite right, let's sort of cover it up, pretend it's not happening. Let's not talk about it. An example would be the Senju Grenadiers when they didn't come out in season. I think they were supposed to come out in season 8. They were going to be on the PTR, and then they weren't ready in time. So you're not allowed to talk about it. Can't pretend they exist. We have to pretend they never were there. And it would be a bit of sometimes a slightly more frank and honest sort of saying, it's gone wrong, it's causing a bug, it causes the game to crash, they're unbalanced, we've not finished the model in time, whatever it means. And sometimes it's better just to talk about things and say, we've got this problem, we're not quite sure how to deal with this, we're thinking about changing this, what's your thought? A little bit more interaction goes a long way to...
Yeah, and I think people will respect that openness.
Yeah, exactly.
And that honesty.
I think,
but again, like we said,
it
is difficult because they don't have control over most of that, do they? Because it's obviously
they don't. No, there has to be but they still have control over sometimes what information they release.
Yeah.
But yeah, just my 2 cents on it.
So, what do you think then is a big part of what keeps players playing? Because obviously, I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but
yeah, no, it's an interesting one. I think I probably have a different experience to most people because I don't actually do any territory war stuff anymore. I haven't for for quite a long time. I don't do
any particular reason for
competitive-
that, or
just time, really. I mean, doing the videos is pretty time consuming, and I still work full time. Sometimes people seem to think I do this as an actual job. I don't. So yeah, really, just the videos take up the bulk of the time. But I don't really do tournaments other than a bit of commentary at some of the CBL stuff. So that's my way of getting involved. So for me, it's siege battles. That is kind of the staple game mode. I might dabble a little bit in the odd death match or free battles or what, but not really. Not very much for me. That core game mode is still siege, but I'm not sure that's necessarily true for the bulk of the veteran players or people who've been playing a long time. I think people tend to probably move to more territory war and tournaments.
that competitive aspect of the game. So, I mean, we've got things like CB Rivals, for example. I think was a very good thing for the game. That obviously Burdekin had the original idea, then CB took over it. We will be having an episode later on in the series that talks about tournaments in more detail, but I think that was very good for the game because it drew a lot of attention and drew a lot of just getting more people from these smaller houses and houses people weren't aware of to make these teams and compete at a top level against what people considered some of the top teams at the time. So I think that was really good for the game. It increased a lot of interest and keeping people playing more. Because you've got to practice, you've got to have scrims, you've got to be playing with that as well. So that does increase that sort of player game time as well.
Yeah, no, I'd completely agree. It's how much to sort of move on similar sort of topic. Then you sort of talk about things introducing new maps and stuff into the siege rotation. I wonder how much they get played really by veteran players. And then new game modes that they put in.
I mean, I think it depends.
Time and effort goes into development over how much do they get played.
I think it depends. I think from my experience, I think veterans mostly play ranked. I think that's one of the biggest things that brings them back in. Yeah. I don't see... There are obviously still quite a few veterans that do play a lot of sieges and that do play actively during the season, but I would say a large proportion of them come online mainly for territory wars and for ranked and those like special event game modes and stuff, which I think is good to a certain extent. It does keep them playing. It does feel sometimes like the siege map rotation, going to your point there as well, isn't what the players want, if that makes sense. Like a lot of the time the maps that get brought in are maps that weren't played by players or were hated by players for a reason. And it's like, oh, we're going to bring this map back, and everyone's like, oh god, why? Yeah. One thing I would say though is good though is they bring out their survey every now and then that says what maps do you want to see in ranked mainly, but also they have done it in the past for sieges as well. I think that is a good thing because they're getting that input from the player base, which I think is another good thing they've done, which is showing that they listen more as they are having these surveys, even for the rank reward skins as well.
On the subject of those surveys, I think on one of the latest ones for what ranked maps would people like to see, only one map had over 50% positive response. So the population is very split over what they like and what they don't like. And I think that really leads into another part of like how people want to play the game. Do you have the ability to just drop in, play a random loadout and do well? We think you do. And I think if we look at some of your videos, Evo, you've retouched upon units that are 3 or 4 seasons old. You've brought them in and said, how do they work? I don't know if you do it in 1 battle or 2 or 3. It might take you a couple of whiles to get...
play 100 games to get that one game.
It might take a while to get those clips. But even if it takes a while, it shows that on occasions, when you've set it up correctly, any unit is viable.
Yeah, and I touched on it earlier as well. The meta is at one of its most balanced states for me at the moment. Yes, you have those strong meta units like we said, but you can pick out almost any unit and still do decently with it if you play it well and if you know how to play it.
I remember watching Nine Fingers play Ironcap's Shield Swordsman, and just watching as he got 6 kills in a game because people just ran at him with them, and he was there like, right, another one, 6-second charge, kill, 6-second charge, kill,
and an insanely short cooldown at the charge.
And players just weren't expecting it, and he used what I'd consider an extremely off-meta pick in a way that was effective against gold units as well. So this shows the capability, and if we think about an ideal balancing world of rock, paper, scissors, it's obviously a lot more complicated than that for ConquerorsBlade, but everything does have a natural counter. It's just, are you willing to play it? Is it fun to play? Is it rewarding to play?
Yeah.
That is where the question is.
You touched on it earlier as well with the whole Keshik argument, right? Is that they could get countered by imp pikes, by pipe militia, but those at the time weren't fun to play, as you put it, and so no one was playing them.
And there's
that makes it so hard to balance, doesn't it? Though, because do you So do you therefore nerf the Kestage, or do you say that it's the player's fault? It's a really hard one to balance, because in many ways for veterans they perhaps were balanced because you can counter them relatively easily, or a lot of it also comes down to map awareness and situational awareness. It's a lot easier to avoid once you're sort of used to that, and I still kind of tunnel vision quite easily, so I end up losing map awareness and getting run over by something. But once you get good, once you get sort of better players, they can be in a fight and aware what's coming behind. But it just makes it so hard to balance, because a lot of players can't do that and therefore have a really miserable experience, getting slaughtered every time. So you sort of run into a bit of a problem.
I mean, that's always been my argument with Maul. You may have seen on the Content Creators Discord, I don't know if you watch it very often, but I've had these arguments with other content creators. I've said, look, Maul is so strong at the moment, for example, because it is very easy to play and it's easy to punish players in sieges that aren't paying attention. Right. But if you're paying attention, it's also very easy to counter Maul. It's just a class that's very easy to pick people off, and because it works so heavy into our meta of mass shields. So, but Maul could just jump in and spin. So, yeah, but if you're letting a Maul run all the way up to a unit, jump in and spin, then you've messed up. Yeah, because you're allowing him that space.
It's interesting, isn't it? I've recently switched. Traditionally, I'm a Poleaxe player predominantly, and I don't really change class loads because it's hard enough trying to get footage on terrible units like Seregs and things. So I try and stay on one hero class. But recently switched to the Glaive, which I think on Frontier is a really sort of an A tier, top tier weapon class at the moment. But I think on my games, I would say probably isn't really considered along the bulk
one of the least played weapons.
Yeah.
I would say.
So, and my initial experience was pretty poor. I got that. It is pretty mediocre. It's not particularly good. Getting killed by Mauls every match, playing medium armor, struggling a little bit with that. And then sort of have been doing, over the past couple of weeks, a lot more research into it, looking at different playstyles, staying mounted, staying on your horse, getting the stun with the dismount, straight into Warlord's Greeting, straight into Flying Reaper, Shield Bash. And actually, you could pretty much one combo them all in just one set of chains, and they can't escape from that at all. And that's suddenly really interesting. So it is interesting how knowledge and skill, probably not skill, but knowledge, a bit of knowledge goes a long way to really changing what is or isn't meta. And it's amazing how, you don't need to know that much, and suddenly something that's terrible can actually become really quite great.
Yeah, and I think that ties into what we've said as well, is that, a lot of this knowledge isn't being shared because these, new players aren't paired up with veterans. They don't have that communication with them to learn a lot of this knowledge.
Yeah.
If we look at some of the tournament teams, Sexy Kebab was a regular MVP in CBL, CBR, Glaive player. Luke Ostrell for Odin's had the most MVPs in season 1 or something for CBR. Again, Glaive player. They are extremely effective when used in different circumstances to how a regular player may play them. They seem relatively specialized, but also they're definitely playable, and that's where I think it's really difficult to then give that balance. And one of the things that, if we look on kind of trends over the last couple of seasons, the introduction of runes and how they can completely change playstyle. If we think of Glaive, the combat dismount, then giving you CC immunity for 6 seconds, or giving you Heat of God of Battle. Same
as when they gave the Poleaxe CC immunity as well. That became super strong for that season, because it meant you could play the other ultimate rather than the choke one. You could play the knockdown. I can't remember what it's called now. But everyone was playing that, and a lot of them were playing full strength with it as well, because you couldn't get stunned out of it. It suddenly became extremely strong.
Yeah.
I think runes are something that has... Oh yeah, the heal as well.
That was fun.
But you could play against it, but it wasn't how people wanted to or were willing to play the game. Like the chokehold just instantly stops CC immunity, and you've got with the chain and scimitar that didn't exist when that Poleaxe rune was around.
Yeah.
The Rough Justice from Poleaxe could have been used, or even Dual Blades with their choke ultimate. You had ways to do it, but people weren't willing to adapt, and people were like, I'd rather play the CC immunity myself, which is what we see with Maul at the moment. So I'd rather play with...
Which is why there's so many of them.
Yeah, and because, again, it's so easy to play. It's so easy to pick up with Maul. It's not the most punishing class to play if you play at a decent level. But at the same time, I think that's also what you see now with the meta changing, and how Dual Blade has now become so prevalent as well, because people suddenly went, well, if Maul has a CC immunity, what can I play that will counter it? We saw a lot more Poleaxes coming out because they could choke it and lock it there. But I did see more scimitars coming out as well because of the choke. Not so much because obviously Maul can still basically one-shot them, but one of the things we started seeing was more and more dual blades. Like the start of this season, you didn't see many dual blades around.
No.
But then towards the end now you see a lot, and then suddenly people realize actually the shuriken throw is really broken, and you can kill hundreds of units without even using your own. You know, we had a guy in our house that through a point only played dual blade, didn't take any units, he just took Martellatori each game, and was still regularly getting like 5-10 hero kills, 150 unit kills without any units.
Yeah.
And again, that wasn't, you weren't seeing that at the start of the season because people didn't twig onto the fact that dual blade was going to be really strong, because everyone would just go, oh well, Maul's strong, so I'll play that. But then people started feeling out all these counters to it.
It's kind of interesting for me. I find something that I struggle with, and perhaps you can comment on this. Is so I try not to, for example, title videos like how to play this, how to play the glaive, how to play the poleaxe, because I don't think I'm even though I'm a veteran player, I'm not necessarily a particularly good player. So I'm not particularly skilled in certain areas. And this kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Temple, about how do you get more information to these sort of newer players? Because inevitably, I'm sure there must be some who end up watching my videos, but then there's an element of I'm more just trying to chart my own journey through ConquerorsBlade and just sort of more for fun, which is why I try not to target things too how-to. But,
it's also difficult doing how-tos because the game evolves and changes every season. Because I started, when I first started streaming, I made a Discord and I was doing like unit veterancy lines, like hero guys, how to play. The next season, they're already out of date. There's no point even having them anymore.
Because
it's so much work to keep updated. Because, every season is completely different mainly because of runes. That's such a huge thing that they brought in.
Runes do make a big part,
They can literally do anything with the game with that. Because they can go, this season we're just going to make this ability do this instead. Give extra range on this, give an extra cooldown on this, which completely changes the meta. Which I think is healthy for the game. I think it's really good, but it also makes it hard for new players, like you said, to keep going with that. And also for veterans. If you're still playing the game, but you're not the best at, seeing all these changes, you don't know what you're doing with it. Maybe you're not in a house, but you're not in like a competitive house, but you're a veteran that's played for a long time. Like, for example, like we said earlier about the sort of the houses playing in the side regions, they might not realize the potential of some of these changes. So they'll still be playing the old meta, they'll still be playing the old stuff because they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the contacts with these sort of innovative players that are figuring all this stuff out as it comes out.
I mean, that is definitely sometimes me. I mean, I think I am sometimes that person. I sometimes will play a unit some way. I think I have this odd ability to sometimes get things to work wrongly. and then you'll post the video and someone say, "What the hell are you doing? Why on earth are you playing like that? Didn't you know that if you put this Beltrine on and change to that veterancy line, they can hit 3 times as many units?" Then, like, oh wow, it's amazing. Yeah.
But if it works, and that's what we said many times, that this meta at the moment, you can play a lot of things in a lot of ways.
You can. You don't have to just be sort of a meta warrior. You can, like you say, you can use other units, and there's quite a few.
Which I feel more so this season. I think historically, if you weren't playing it the meta way, you would just lose. Whereas more so now, the more the season's going on, I think the game is getting to a more balanced state. But I like the ever-changing meta that the game has, because a lot of people are saying, well, it's not balanced. But what do they want? Do they want every single thing to be balanced perfectly, so you have to just play the same thing every time? Because everything's perfectly, but what is balanced to them? Look at any competitive game, the meta changes every time because they go, oh, well, this is a bit strong at the moment, so we'll tweak that. This brings this forwards. Okay, well, now we'll tweak this. But it's ever changing meta that keeps the game constantly going, constantly evolving, and constantly fresh and new. It's not just the same thing over and over and over again.
But then, is it the time frame? Is it the speed of balance changes that perhaps more the problem? I sometimes feel like I would rather have regular experimental balance changes where they go, oh, let's change this, let's change that. Oh God, that was a terrible idea. Let's change that back. Not let's change this. Right, let's wait here for 2 months while everyone's miserable.
I think the speed of changes is one of the biggest issues for players, for veterans especially, because it's like, oh well, we've realized on week 1 this is stupidly broken right now. What were you going to do about it? Oh, we're going to wait to the end of the season to change it.
Yeah, and that's frustrating.
But it is also difficult as well because they have the aspect of having now with the tier locks with the blue, then purple and gold, because that massively changes the meta as well.
It does, yeah.
Because something might be strong in blue tier, but then once you get to tier 4 or tier 5, then all of a sudden it's not broken. Something else is really strong instead because of the different change of different units and all that kind of stuff. And that's what I think with Maul as well. Maul was very strong in tier 4 meta because tier 4 meta is mainly shields and very heavy melee stuff. Obviously there were dagger axes, but there's not really... You don't see any of the cav really around. You don't see a lot of range. It's just a lot of melee and shields. And so then, because people didn't have the monks unlocked necessarily then straight away, but then when it goes to tier 5, a lot more cav comes out. Maul is very weak into cav. So then you saw Maul dropping off. It still is played a lot, obviously, because like we said, it's a very easy class to play. But I feel like it's dropped off a lot more now because there's so much cav there, because there's the range of the Falcos and things like that are very easy to knock Maul down. And once Maul is on the floor, it's very easy to kill it.
I think there's sometimes a distinct difference between overpowered in a sort of technical sense, something is too strong, and unfun mechanics. So I think for me, Maul's traditional, which isn't a problem anymore, but traditionally the grab, which is what a lot of people complained about, I don't think it was necessarily overpowered, but it was just a bit crap to play against. And I think there's a difference there between overpowered and just unfun mechanics, and they're not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that.
I think that's a really nice summary, actually. We talked about runes. They define the meta at times. We talk about the Poleaxe one. Are there any other examples of the runes since they were released you went, oh, that was a particularly fun one? The one that comes to mind that really changed was the musket one, where every time you throw a bomb, it reduces the cooldown of all other bombs.
Yay, bomb musket.
Bomb musket. You just... It became impossible to move because there's 5 caltrops all around you and your unit's not going anywhere.
Yeah, cav just standing still mid-charge, or basically standing still because of the amount of caltrops that are thrown down.
Were there any other examples that you guys can think of for that?
So for me, I'm a longsword main, so having all the extra healing things they brought in, just the passive heal they brought in for it, healing on resupplies, taking less damage on objective points as well, just meant that longsword was a bit weak until that point. It wasn't the most meta thing. It was just basically a support bot. You'd take heal, you'd take move speed, and then you do that. They changed it obviously to combine them both, which is a really good change. But being able to have these extra defenses on points meant you could actually contest a lot more with longsword. You could go onto a capture point, or you'd be defending a capture point. You wouldn't die as quickly because you had the extra healing. You had the reduced damage taken on the objective points. You had a lot of other bonuses like that, which made it a lot more fun to play. And I think that's why I like the runes. To a certain extent, there are the cases like you said, bomb musket was awful for a player like me who didn't play range, but for musket's time it was great. But I think it's really it's an easy way for them to change the meta without having to completely change a whole class. They can just go, oh well, for this season we've got this rune because it will tweak this class a bit for this season. We'll see how it goes. Then maybe that add it into it, like they did with Maul, which I think was a bad decision in the end. Where they had the one season where Maelstrom couldn't be blocked. When it was in its spin, they had that CC immunity, and then a couple seasons later, that is now part of the kit. Now they changed it. Maelstrom tier 4 is now CC immune. That was originally a rune to start with. So I think things like that is good for them because they can test out some changes that they maybe want to do to tweak a class without actually having to change the whole class. They can just go, oh, we'll just try this and see how it works. And if it goes well, let's add it. If it's not good, we can just take that rune out for the next season.
I think that really nicely sums up kind of the veteran experience about what we find when we play the game. As we're used to things and we don't have to learn 15 seasons worth of units, we just learn one new one building upon the knowledge we have already. So there's a number of events lately that have been aimed at veteran players. So we've seen the introduction of new doctrines, and I remember there were a number of players that had piles and piles of doctrines stacked up in their inventories, and they then were able to just splurge all of them and clear up their inventory there. We recently had the Vault
and they brought out the alchemy.
And then they brought out the alchemy, yeah. And we recently had the Vault Key one. Do we think that there is a shift now towards catering towards players that have been playing a really long time and rewarding those players?
I would say with the Vault Key one, yes.
Yes,
new players would struggle with that, but veterans like me myself, I still got a stack of them, but I had like 300 Vault Keys that were just stacked up.
Yeah. That was nice. That was, because not only clear inventory space, but I'm going to get rewarded for it. That was really nice. I think Doctrines I think the problem with Doctrines or the Doctrine Alchemy, perhaps specifically we should say now, is that it's definitely opening the gap between a new player and a veteran player. And so you're adding a skill gap, which is now existing between someone who's been playing a long time and someone who hasn't. Less players in the game, so matchmaking is now new players versus veteran players, and then you're giving veteran players extra statistical boosts to make their units even stronger now on top of all the rest. And so it is perhaps starting to, I don't think it's necessarily helped the new player experience, should we say.
Particularly when it is complicated.
I would say on the other side of that, I think that the new crafting system has benefited the new player because you have these veterans, I mean, to an extent. To an extent, there is a carrying as well. But you have these veterans that spent, in some case, years getting the best gear they could, crafting it or buying it. But now that gear is worthless, basically, because if you don't have the new reforged gear, your old gear is non-comparable to someone that has it. Because you could have I had some of the best guardsman boots in the game. 25 leadership, almost perfect stats on them, but a purple on the reforged system had better stats.
Right. Yeah.
And so you have to then reforge all this gear, and a lot of veterans have complained about that because they spent, in some cases, like I said, years getting this amazing gear to now basically be useless.
I agree.
And yes,
you
can still
nice
play.
They had the lock. That was kind of the
locking one thing was
players,
good, but it was just, I have to lock my leadership on my leadership gear then, and then I'll read everything else.
Yeah.
So like I said, using that example, I went from my guardsman, I went down to a purple set of boots because it just had like 1500 health on it and a couple of defenses, but it was nowhere near to the stats I had in it before. They were almost max in every category.
Yeah, it's hard, but then I agree. Yeah, it does make a big difference. That you can't necessarily get stuck into a system that you can never change because that's.
I think change is good, but it does also have the other impact as well. I think that's why also Maul was so strong, because it was a lot easier to craft decent heavy armor gear than it is light. Firstly, they're the same resource cost, which I do think light armor should be cheaper. But the heavy armor, you can just get a bad heavy armor will still have like an extra 2000 health on it. So it just becomes so much stronger with all those stats, whereas the light armor, you have to get very good crafts on it to be good, if that makes sense. And you're a lot more dependent on your weapon, whereas the heavy armor, as long as you've got good armor, your weapon doesn't matter as much.
Slightly frustrating sometimes how some weapons will have just a couple of, so to say, just have piercing damage, and it's quite easy, therefore, to craft quite a good quality one. Other than poleaxe, for example, and other classes, you've got piercing, slashing, and blunt, and so you end up with wrong stats quite easily. You end up having to, sometimes you have to do 10 times as many crafts to get a good one as you do one.
And it's got even harder now with the introduction of toughness and armor on top of strength and agility that were already there. Are there any changes that we think would actually be helpful for that? So would the ability to lock a second stat be useful? Or would the reduction in cost of, say, reforging stones?
It's a hard one because there's whatever you change, whichever direction you go with it, it's pros and cons. There's no definitive right or wrong. A second lock would be nice. Definitely for veteran players, it's helpful because, as Temple says, you've already got the good stats, the good statistics that you can carry over. So you're carrying more stuff over, allows you to more min-max your gear because you've got the resources. For example, I've got 3 million silver or whatever it is. I can buy purple schematics
for some.
Market. Well, I don't play territory well, so I never buy artillery. I can throw money at it. But a new player can never do that. So by locking a second statistic, I can continuously work on getting a bit of glaive, for example, which is what I'm playing at the moment.
Would a proposition be if you lock one stat, it costs 20 artificer stones, but if you lock two, it costs 35? And you then increase the cost, and you basically make it like, I'm saving up for this because I really want it to go well. I think that could be a really nice proposal. Where you reduce your risk, you increase your cost. I feel like that's a really nice way to scale a lot of this. And we see that with some of the doctrine system, where people have thrown every doctrine they have into one particular of the X nodes when you look on the War Scholar screen, and they've yet to get the specific doctrine they want. And they've thrown 200 treaties into these, if not 1,000 in some cases.
I mean, it's a running joke in Origin at the moment that every time you get a tier 5 doctrine, it's going to be a buckler infantry one.
Yeah.
Or it's going to be they take less damage in the open world. Like that, because that's what people seem to be getting from it most.
I think one of our guys has got, 12 health doctrines in a row, which just you can't put on the same thing twice.
I feel like in many ways, though, the War Scholar is not redundant because you still obviously need it to get your base doctrines. But compared to Doctrine Alchemy, I mean, the disparate, the level of difference between is so severe in my opinion. Particularly things like this is why I think then you get veteran players. It's very nice for me for video creation because, say, I have things like I've even got doctrines that no one can get now. Like I've got a damage doctrine. It's like 100 buff to slashing, piercing, and blunt plus health bonus with it. I move that basically between every unit because it's better than any base doctrine. It covers everything, and you're getting a health bonus.
I've still got two temporary tier 5 doctrines I've never used. They're just sat in my doctrine side, because as soon as I use them, they're gone. But they just sat there, and someone, I remember screen sharing once, someone go, "You've got tier 5 doctrines, what is that?" I was like, because they were the golden doctrines at the time, before we had these new ones. And I was like, I've just had those since the start of the game, basically.
Yeah, they're just relics. But I mean, it makes such a big difference. And then, rather than just a breakthrough doctrine, I've got a purple tier 5 version of it, and it's a boosted breakthrough. Plus, it provides, 110 extra slashing damage on whatever you put on it, or whatever, the extra boost. And it's such a big difference between a base breakthrough and adding something like that, particularly when you put it on. So obviously, it has a bigger percentage impact on certain units than others, but some stuff it can have a huge impact on. And that sort of level of disparity can make big differences to how a unit performs.
So would we recommend any changes to that kind of system?
Well, how do you change it now? To some extent, Pandora's box is open a little bit.
Would you have it so that if you put in 5 infantry doctrines, you're guaranteed an infantry one there? Or would you
some kind of format that could be an interesting way of doing it, where the outcome is dependent on what you put into it. Or even going down the locking stream, maybe you have to put in more doctrines, but you can lock it to a certain type. So let's say instead of 8 purples, maybe you've got to put in 16, but you could lock it into an infantry doctrine. Or you could lock it into a certain type of doctrine like that.
And that costs you your true wisdom. By doing that, you give yourself your opportunity to do that. I think there are mechanics in the game that exist, but can we bring them together to hopefully make this a better experience?
I don't know how much, because obviously I've completed it now, whether they've introduced any of them, as the base green, blue, purple, whatever they're called, the base doctrines that you put into the alchemy mixer, whether they've introduced them to things like F4 quests now or not.
Because they tended to give the wisdoms out, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, unless you've got the purple base, purple doctrines to put in to craft them, and putting having a wisdom is pretty pointless. So I would certainly be making them more readily available to new players, because I mean, obviously I had hundreds, if not 1,000, of doctrines to craft, and still only you've got a handful of really good doctrines that I really like, at top tier. So making it so that you're getting 100 greens or 100 blues as a sort of not just given to you, but as part of the tutorial quest, certainly I don't think would be excessive, and at least start people down that right path.
I do think one good thing they've done alongside it, though, is they have these weekends where it's free to remove your doctrines. They've had them a couple of times now. I think that's very helpful, especially for the newer players. I mean, it's good for the veterans as well, because you can tweak stuff that you want to, but especially for the newer players, you can think, oh, well, I've learned now that actually maxing this particular unit was a bad choice. I've now got this unit instead, but now I can move these doctrines over for free.
Yeah,
because otherwise Lotus Water was a problem for a lot of people. People didn't have the amount to be able to change it.
Yeah, and the cost of it is quite high to start throwing, when you start wanting to remove an epic doctrine at 5 Lotus Water.
Especially when, I mean, you can speak for yourself, but from my experience, new players will always go range first. Because that's the exciting thing they see in the tree. And then they actually realize, actually, range is not the best. I need to get these melees, but now I've thrown everything on a tree, I've thrown everything here into range. What do I do? Is it better just to make a new account, or do I try and change everything over now?
Yeah, maybe we should just touch on that briefly. It's a really interesting thing, isn't it? Ranged in Conqueror's Blade. I mean, I'm not much of a ranged. I'm not much of a ranged, and I'm not much of a cavalry. I'm just an infantry player predominantly. I like melee. I like being in the front of the fight.
Same here.
So ranged is really interesting, because I think it can be effective. Of course, good range can be good, but as you say, a lot of new players are drawn to ranged. And sort of mediocre range is kind of like a hallmark of Conqueror's Blade sometimes, and a hallmark of a bad team, really.
Yeah, I mean, you have the typical NA going, oh, EU only plays range, and EU going, oh, NA only plays range.
Yeah, exactly.
You always have that argument. So,
and how do you try and discourage that or not? It's always interesting. I never want to comment on it too much on video. Do you try and stop people from playing ranged? Because it would make for better teams, but at the same time, people should be able to do what they want in the game and enjoy it. It's just really interesting, I think, the whole range thing. I'm always conscious of not doing, two. I would never do like 2 Archer videos in a row. So
but it's like when it's played well, it can be really effective. But you do have the typical, we could have won this push, but there's 3 guys sat with their range halfway back across the map.
With the hero stood with them in the safe zone, trying to lob an arrow.
And it's always a longsword. I don't know why, but it's always a longsword.
Gotta keep them healthy.
Give it a speed boost.
Do you look at maybe potentially having some sort of unit lock where you can only have X number of units in each round? Do you look at something like that? Is that going to be healthy for the game, where you say, actually, you can only have, let's say, for example, 10, you can only have 10 units of cav, you can only have 10 units of this. Do you look at some kind of lock like that?
I don't.
Is
Yeah,
that going to be helpful to the
question.
game?
I'll speak from example when I was on a U2. We had a guy that I think he had an underlying health condition that meant he could mostly only play with one hand, but he had moments when he could play with two, and it meant that he really did enjoy his ranged units because they required a lot less micro, and he was able to play them. And by putting that cap on it, I think you eliminate the guy that's just logged on at 7 p.m. on a Friday. He's done a full day's work and just wants to play his favorite unit in his favorite game on his favorite class and have some fun. Like, we don't want to ever discourage that.
That is the but then we're circling right the way back round to the start, aren't we? Which is, how do you balance such different play styles? Because some people are just, it is fundamentally it is a game, and it's supposed to be fun.
But again, I think
different people.
I think a lot of that is down to, especially more pronounced recently, like you touched on earlier, is that because the player base is so low now, the matchmaking is just. Matchmaking in this game has always been questionable from my personal experience.
I agree.
Especially if you look at ranked, for example, even in the first season when it came out and there was still a decent player base in the game, I could miss the first 2 weeks of ranked. The first game I would play the next week, I'll be the lowest rank and I'll get matched into a game with one of the top 25 in ranked. Right. It's always had that matchmaking option, but I can't queue up with them, but I can still get into the game with them. And I think that's more prevalent in Sieges recently. My experience the last couple of weeks in Sieges have been the games are normally 9 times out of 10 are a one-sided stomp at the moment. That's my experience at the moment in the game, which I don't think is very good or healthy for the game. But again, that's down to the player base. We're talking about sort of the veteran experience, how do we keep veterans here, but they need to do something to bring in more new players. If you look at the advertising for the game, what do you see them advertising at the moment? Almost nothing. I remember back 5, 6, 7 seasons ago, probably longer than that, probably 10 seasons ago, I would see an advert every single day on Facebook for it. Even just that. The amount of streamers they're getting to play the game. They had the Mountain play the game, for goodness sake.
So two things then I'll touch on here, if we're going on down the marketing route, is one, even I did some of the adverts for the game. So, it's kind of testament to how sort of minimal the marketing was.
The only advert I ever saw for the game was you, Evo, and that was after I'd been playing it for about 3 months. So.
Right. Yeah, no, obviously glad to help however I can, but I don't think that necessarily is testament that we're sort of really on a high tier marketing. And
and then just to cut you in there, sorry, but just going on that as well, is like when they do get people to play the game, they're just fighting against bots. But you look at the Mountain, he was just fighting against AI. That was it. That's all he was doing. Because that is what the game is when you first start. So it's not the best market of the game. How did you find the game, Evo?
Well, for me, it was when Total War Arena collapsed. And then a lot of the Total War Arena community moved over to this beta of ConquerorsBlade. And then that's when I joined and got talking to, it was Caden at the time. I don't know how many people in the comments will remember Caden, but and that's how I ended up getting into it. But to touch briefly on your point about when they hire people in and then they tend to have a bad experience, like you say, just playing with bots. So I did a sponsored video for a game called Albion Online, and as part of that sponsorship, they basically offer to pair you with an existing content creator, and they walk you through the game, because Albion's it's so much there.
Which is what I want for this game as well. It's something I always want to do. Because another famous case I remember is, I don't know if you followed League of Legends much, but Dyrus played the game for a bit. But he hated it because he was sat in just queues all the time trying to get into matchmaking, because at that point on NA, they didn't have the best player base, and he'd be sat in queue. I remember vividly just watching him inside, I think it was Orgolia, just on his horse, jumping around in a circle for 2 or 3, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, waiting for a queue to pop. And that's why he ended up stopping playing, because of the queues, I think. I don't know 100% on it. But I've always wanted them to get these high priority people in, but pair them up with someone. Give them a higher level account, for example. Give them an account that's already got everything unlocked. It doesn't matter, but pair them up with someone who has game knowledge, or at least have them prep them. Because I didn't watch the Yogscast stuff, but what was that like, Drayton? Because you said that got you into it.
So the Yogscast one was, there were a number of members of that community that already played the game, and as soon as it became obvious that this big advertising campaign kicked off, those players came in and said, right, I've played, I'm a level 500, let me help you. And the Yogscast players have the guarantee that it's going to be terrible gameplay. That's one of the things that they guarantee. And they went from being unable to take on the Great Wall, which was the really hard challenge that you could do like 3 or 4 times a week against AI. And if you remember, halberdier sergeants just kick your ass and they spawn wave after wave of them. And they couldn't get past the first stage of that. But then when they were shown how to do it by some of the members of the community, they were then able to do it on their own, and they were then able to teach others. And that's kind of how they started 3 houses, formed their own alliance. The members were the lieges, and they didn't play for very long, but there's a really famous member on EU2 and part of the Yogscast community called Suro the Death. And Suro would give them a weekly update on how they'd gone on in Territory War, and then you'd see it in their later videos saying, "Oh, I love my updates from Suro." So that it then kept it going for a bit longer, and then they did another campaign on EU5 when that first was early in its infancy, but they've not come back to it since. And I think the issue that you had with that is a load of players swarmed in, and then some of them went, "You know what, I do really like this game," and then they wanted to learn more, and then other players moved on. But we're not getting that massive influx of players from where 1,000 people start playing the game and 300 stuck around. Like, that's a pretty good return, and that's what happened because of those. And we spoke about this. I think a new server where veteran players are not allowed to transfer onto, to be introduced, and you then get a big advertising campaign, match up these like sponsored people with known members of the community that speak their language, that have played the game a while, and show them how to do it, and then take them through like a couple of territory wars even. That would be an amazing experience, and you then get an influx of players that aren't met with this impossible skill curve that it currently exists in the game. So if we look at the breakdown of a new player, we're going to talk with Plumshin about this tomorrow, I think. You play against bots and with bots, and then you play against bots with players, and then you play against 5 players with bots, and then you hit about level 100, and then you're against top tier players. The curve is just impossible.
But is it too late now? Is my question. Is it too late to get that player sim? Because the game is quite well known amongst the communities. Have already too many people tried it and then gone off it because of the state of the game at the time? Because you talk about the Yogscast, they have a very big following. Is there the following that other people can bring in that wouldn't have already played the game, haven't been turned off it, that don't realise that the game is in a much better state now? So there that player base there?
Watching Evo's videos from early seasons to now, the game it's recognisable, but it's come a long way.
It's so different, isn't it?
It's so different.
It is hard to imagine. I can't actually remember that much being like that until I actually go back and watch the videos and think, Christ, I can't remember the UI even looking like this.
Yeah, I see it when people like pull out old screenshots from like season, before season 5. So I'm like, is that how the game used to look? Like, wow,
yeah, it's amazing.
I don't remember that.
It is quite incredible how
so much has changed, and I think we need to accept that there have been positive changes, and we need to like advertise those. But whether or not they're happening, and whether or not that's on the future plans, is a point of discussion. I think if we can get that new server that is protected from level 4000s descending upon it and just noob stomping.
I mean, you'll have that to a certain extent because people will just create new accounts to play on there. But yeah, if you stop people from transferring to it, it's fair. It's one of the feedbacks I've given to them since the start of the game. Like I said, I used to have a feedback session at the end of every season. I said either you lock one region where once you're a certain level, you have to leave, or you make a new server. So merge all the servers, you make a new one that stays by itself for 1, 2, 3 seasons. At the end of that then merges into the main one. Then you make a new server, and you have that cycling repeat that keeps the population up in the one server, but also gives that aspect for these new players to learn the game amongst players of the same skill level. My concern is it too late for that? Can they get the player base in?
The problem I think CB tends to have is that nothing ever quite goes very smoothly. If you're going to do that, which I agree, I think is a good thing, but you have to hit the ground running, right? There's no point not having enough players in that server on day one, so you have to advertise, as it launches, right? It has to be there, ready players going in. There's no point bringing new players in if there's only 50 people on the server. Cross-server matchmaking is enabled and they can't get a match. It's completely pointless. The server has to be smooth and running when it's released, not on day one or someone's actually installed the game probably wrongly on the server and it's got to come out for 6-hour maintenance. All these things, nothing ever really just lines up perfectly. You have to hit day one running. I remember when this game first released back in 2019 or something, or whenever it was, we had really good initial day one player numbers, and there was huge server lag. How many players, their only experience of Conqueror's Blade was just lag on day one, on day two?
Yeah.
It took them 2 weeks. It's so frustrating and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it historically. I mean, I don't know what it's like for yourself, but amongst my circle especially, there's like a sort of running joke that any new thing that comes in, it's going to be broken on day one.
Yeah,
it's just a thing with CB. That's what you expect. Like when they did the big territory war changes, there was drill mode the first day. Anytime there's any change that impacts territory war, it's normally a drill mode the first day, which they announce after territory war started because something's gone wrong.
Yeah, I mean, even like, for example, which it's hard to without. I don't want to make it all about me, but even like things like the PTR, I find it really frustrating that they have the capacity to run about 2 custom matches. Like this is supposed to be this is the first time the season is shown off to new players, live streaming to the entire CB community, and people can't test units because what people are watching are people having an error message 20 times. And it's like this is the first impression.
Yeah, you can tie it into the tournament as well. The original CBLs, you couldn't do practice games on the tournament server because they said that their servers didn't have the capacity to run custom games at a large level. All the only custom games they could do was when the matches were live, and that was it.
Yeah,
you couldn't you wouldn't have access. Now they've developed it enough that you have access to those custom games normally during the week with the tournament server. But even still, that was how it was to start with. You'd have to try and back then we didn't have custom lobbies on the live game either. So trying to do you couldn't do practice games. You'd have to just do lots of strats and things like that.
Yeah, but day one is so important. The game makes or breaks on the new season release. It has to work day one. The new server has to work day one. You don't get second chances in games. Things have to work, and if you keep making mistakes like that, then you just cannot build a large game population. You just don't get to recover from those mistakes.
I think that's an excellent point. We've talked a lot about a lot of things. There were some other examples that I really wanted to talk about how the game had changed since watching, say, beta gameplay, pre-season gameplay to now. And one of the largest ones, which is kind of poignant this season, is we've got a new piece of artillery. And artillery has been an integral part of the game certainly since I've played. But it's changed a lot. I remember when a mortar shell could wipe out an entire unit of Imperial Spearguard if it was placed well. Evo, one of your videos that I watched from your pre-season one, you headshot a guy with a cannon, probably a blue one. It did 50,000 damage to him and just instantly killed him and his unit.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest ones is culverins. They used to not have a maximum number of things they could hit, right? So you just fire it through and it would just hit every single unit that it would hit. Now I think it's a maximum of, is it 5 or 10 or something that can hit?
Depends on the culverin.
And it's the same with siege blisters, for example. They can only hit, is it 15 units, I think, at the moment now? Or it might even be less than that. But they have a certain maximum number that they can kill.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it might even be 5, actually, not 15, for siege blisters. So that never used to be a thing either. There's been something. I remember back in the pre-season. Well, actually, no, season 1 in Were Rabbits, when we were fighting. Well, maybe in season 2 actually, because it was when we were fighting Injustice, and the city was almost impossible to take because of the amount of siege that they placed. Just cannons, mortars everywhere, and it was almost impossible to push into it. Because of course, back then you didn't have things like falcos that could counter siege. It was literally you jump in with your hero, or you counter it with your own siege, which is when you were fighting in the western cities at the time, were almost impossible.
Yeah, that is true. It is amazing how much artillery has changed, as you say. It did used to be just absolutely ridiculous. It has thankfully been toned down a lot more now. But I mean, artillery is a lot more readily available now than it used to be as well. Artillery used to be a lot more rare and unique.
You even look at the new event now, the Raider camp one outside, which was the old Rebel camps. You can get siege from that. You can each time you play that, you get a chance of getting the new siege. But I've had culverins, mortars, cannons, siege, ballistas, Scorpios. You can get loads of siege from that, and it's blue and purple you can get as well. So there is a lot more siege in the game. One thing I would like them to do again is bring back another bombard event, because there are a lot of players that have never seen or used a bombard, because it was something that was back in season, what was it, 2 or 3 that they first brought it in, that everyone got one of them, and then they just haven't done it since. The only time you really see it now, the only time you really see it now is in capital attacks and defenses, or the CMs using it. Because if you don't have a bombard, you can't search for it on the store either. So even if someone sells it, you can't find it unless you have a bombard.
Right. Didn't know that.
Yeah, it's something that's been from the start. So I would like to see them bring that back because I think it adds some variation, adds some excitement as well. Because most of the time, bombards built are bad bombards. You'll kill your own team with it, but it adds some fun. It adds some excitement, and that's something that a lot of the players in this game don't have. Because I remember using mine in ranked, the first season of ranked, and it was so much fun. I had it. I think it was on. What was it? It was on Sun City. I had two. So I had one on Hidden City that I was using against Tiggs and Tatooine Samur at the time, because I think it was after I'd left the house and gone into POC, I think it was. So they were against me, so I was like, I'm using my bombard. I think I killed one of them, but basically hit nothing. But the second one was on Sun City, and it was the most stacked ranked lobby I'd ever seen. It was like all the top players in one lobby, basically. And it was on Sun City defense, and I sat on the last point with it and shot it into sea and killed like 3 heroes and like 80 units or something. It was like the best thing. I was just like, this is incredible. This is amazing. But then the next shot missed completely, and then someone came and killed it. So it's really hit or miss, but it adds that excitement, adds that bit of just who knows what's going to happen.
So players get to use it. They get to use it on Reggie, but there's 3 of them, and there's 15 people all spawning on the same point trying to get hold of it. But you then look at, again, slightly relating this to new players versus veterans. Veterans know where to put their artillery, and they've made the mistakes of putting it down too close to a wall behind them. So then when they jump onto it, they can't see anything. We've all done it. And you have to fall down rabbit holes. You have to make mistakes to then learn how to get better. And I think the communities are much better. The standard of play is a lot better now than it certainly was a couple of seasons ago. And you have to make mistakes. So if you want to use that incredibly precious, I have one of these and I'm only ever going to get one of these resource, and you put it down wrong, where's the satisfaction in that? And you literally had one bite of the apple and you've messed it up. If you're going to have things that are up on this pedestal, you need to have, and they're game changers. You need to have the ability to practice with them, and that's where I think that reintroducing that would be really, really cool. Are there any final points before we start to summarize? I'd say, because we have talked for an hour and a half.
Cracky, time flies.
I think one little one that I want to just get Eva's opinion on is the difference in territory wars now to what it used to be. So obviously we used to have what was called the click wars. You know, historically, especially with like Conqueror City, whoever clicked on the city and whoever managed to load in first, that was how you decided who would get in and who would try and get control of that. Remember, especially like the gates of Conqueror City, you just had like 150 people on every gate, just spamming click, trying to get in, trying to load the battle fast enough. People learning like what angle to put your camera so it would load into the menu faster, all that kind of stuff. So now it went over to then like the resource nodes, and now it's just prestige now. So how that has evolved. What's your opinions on that?
It has changed a lot. Interestingly, on the click wars, before I played ConquerorsBlade, I used to play Eve online, and a lot of that used to be about how quickly you could try and grab the loot, particularly if you're in a high contest area. So I was quite good at the click wars to try and get in. So I always did okay on that. It's interesting how it's changed, isn't it? Obviously, I think it's the problem I find with the territory war is whenever there's a change, there tends to be uproar. From what I see on the sidelines a little bit, and they try and change things based on some of the problems, and then create sometimes another 3 problems. I do feel like it's a better system now, but it's interesting to watch because I'm not doing it day to day. It's interesting to watch from the sidelines and kind of see the thing. But you almost always see whenever they make a substantial change to the way they want to change the mechanics in territory war, it's always interesting to see how everyone's always so up in arms about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a less random system now, which I think is good.
Yeah.
And I think to an extent for the veterans, it is good because it encourages, again, more gameplay. You've got to log in, you've got to do your daily quests, you've got to do thief quests, you've got to win sieges to get the house finished, to get that prestige. Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, it introduces problems of, some houses we know of that will just make a new account and do some quests, and then make a new account, join the house and do some quests, and make a new account. And there is ways of abusing it. But I do think overall is better because it adds less just randomness to the game. You actually have to do stuff. It encourages you to play more when it's not broken. There have been a few times where the new region opens just as everyone's going to move over, and you save your prestige, and then it's a drill mode because they messed up something.
Yeah, which kind of goes back to what we said earlier, doesn't it? They do have that. There's a slight annoying ability that they seem to be able to do that quite a lot. Sometimes it's the small things I find. Like I really like this season how we've got fame for doing siege battles. Like it's just that it's a small thing. It's a really small thing, but a little encouragement. It just makes you think, oh, that wasn't a complete waste of time. I've got 100 fame for winning that. That's nice because new or veteran, people want to be getting through the Fame Store because there's some pretty good rewards in it. So
yeah, I mean,
like that
I don't think the Fame Store was ever a big issue to get maxed if you were active. But like you said, for those casual players that just come on for a couple hours on the weekend, that makes it easier for them to max that out. So it is useful.
Yeah.
It helps you get it faster. You don't need it because with donations and things, you can hit it if you're active. But it is nice to have that on there as well.
Yeah, for me, I like it. I'm often away with work for a week or two on end, so I end up missing a week of donations. And so for me, it's quite nice to have a chance of catching up slightly.
I think there's a difference in emphasis as well between like daily quests versus weekly. Seasons and seasons ago, I don't know if you guys remember, you used to be able to do your daily quest twice.
Yeah, if you logged in at a certain point,
if you logged in early in the morning and then you hit it for our time about 5 p.m, it reset your daily quests, and you're able to do it twice. And when you're trying desperately to get like every honor that you can possibly get to then unlock the latest tier 5, an extra 300 honor was you playing for another 2-3 hours. So it made a big difference.
So it's amazing how irrelevant honor feels now, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it does.
Well, that's one of the things I was going to mention as a veteran. How are you with honor? Because with me, I've been honor maxed for a very long time. My inventory is full of honor tokens. I've probably got about 200,000 or 300,000, if not more, honor just in tokens in my inventory. That's like, when do you, I imagine they'll do something with it eventually, but that's been there for a very long time. And especially now that it's like the honor tree is kind of redundant because they're not evolving that, they're not adding that, it's all seasonal units now. Do you think they should add more honor tree units like they did with the monastic tree and everything they brought in, the rattan tree? Do you think that would be something that's healthy for the game for them to bring in another honor tree set of units?
It's yes and no, isn't it? Because they've sort of backed themselves into a corner on that front. It would be nice, but how do you do it without compromising a season, I suppose? Say you put a season into the honor tree, then basically they're saying, oh, we don't want any money for the next 3 months. So what, how does it ever happen? That's yeah. I agree. Unless it's a side project they work on over sort of 3 or 4 seasons of building a set of units, it would be really nice.
And most importantly, when are we going to get our tier 5 longbows?
Yeah. I've noticed
they teased for so long.
I've seen a real increase in longbows this season.
Here's my couple of reasons for that.
Yeah. Here's my input on that. Longbows as a unit can be devastating. They can be used very well. They deal a lot of damage. The problem is that, like we've discussed, a lot of the time you will have a longsword hero that sits at the back of the map with them and is useless. Not the range. It's just the whole range conversation we kind of touched on earlier as well. It's like range, when played well, can be very devastating, and that's where a lot of new players pick it up because they'll play some range early on against some of the bots. They'll farm like 150 unit kills with it. It's great, but then they start matching up against the better players with the heavy shielded units. The range isn't going to do very much. The heroes jump in, punish their range, then they don't really do anything. That's where it's then deemed as useless by a lot of the community. But when you play it well, like we've got some people in Origin that will regularly play longbows that will farm 200 unit kills with it. Because they know what to do with it. They're not sat with the unit, they're pushing with the team, but they're targeting their units where they need to.
Yeah.
If they lose it, they lose it, but they've caused the pressure, they've done the damage they need to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. And you're absolutely right. And it's obviously hard. It's very satisfying, particularly as a glaive hero with the mounted horse ability, just to run through a unit of longbows and just do a spin right through the middle and the entire thing is dead. And it's obviously quite fun. And it's also interesting
with
to see...
longsword as well, where they changed the ult.
You
so you have the hitboxing, so you could charge and kill all of them now.
Same, you sometimes get them on the I can't think what they're called, but it's not Bandit Raid. It might be Bandit Raid. Whatever the one is where you get the most experience, the current version of Expeditions basically. And you sometimes every now and then you'll get a newer player who spawns in with, I don't know, Namcans or something, and then they end up getting 3 kills through the entire thing, and everyone else gets 400.
You're like monks or cav, and you're like 400, 500 unit kills, and you just look back and they're sat in the middle of the map on the resupply, dying to cav with like 5 unit kills, and you're like,
and you just think, oh no,
buddy. I remember playing Expedition 3s, and you play with that guy that would get 300 kills, and you'd be like, I hate that person. And then I've played the game so long, I've become what I hated.
But then it's even like with Expeditions 3s used to be quite difficult, and you'd have to, you get the certain maps, like you get the village map where you had to set up shields in certain areas, or you would just lose. And that's one thing I've liked recently. They've made these events a lot harder. Like with the bandit camps you have at the moment, they're not easy to win. They're easy to win if you know what you're doing, but the first time you do it, you go in, you just lose. You die, you get overwhelmed by halberds. It's not an easy thing to do. Once you know the layout, once you know what you're doing with it, you can complete it quite easily. But it's not like it's just a free event they bring in. You're like, oh, this is easy, yeah, let's farm it, cool, let's go. It requires some thinking, requires some brain cells to actually
there's
do, which is what I like about veteran
PvE.
experience.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to play that yet, Evo?
I have dabbled in it. I've not done it properly. No,
you've not done properly. Like, it's a question of like, you would be going into this fresh. I had people show me how to do it. Like, how are the new players gonna come up against the game mode? Because it is punishing. If you don't know what's gonna happen when it's gonna happen, and you misstep at all and are killed, you potentially have just spawned another 4 units of halberdier sergeants that you just don't have the stuff to deal with.
Yeah.
I think we touched upon this earlier. Like, how as veterans are we able to pass that knowledge on if we're not in the same guilds as people? If we're not in the same houses?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think it's funny, isn't it, how there's always that mix. I feel like I've probably got the audience, but not necessarily skilled necessarily to always teach that. And then sometimes it's the other way around, that there's probably some very skilled people but with a small audience, so it doesn't get the message out. Really, the two seem to coincide. So I think veteran players, it can be quite a toxic community, which isn't necessarily a good thing for it. But sometimes, there is a lot people can do. I try and respond to comments in game. If someone asked the other day, what skills are you using on your glaive? It doesn't take long just to tell a new player, I'm using this, and this. And that makes a big difference, because there's nothing to tell you what skills to use. But hero skills makes a huge difference. If you're using the wrong thing, I mean, it's just crap. If you're using Hail of Blades, it's just pointless. So little things, that we can all do, and the people listening to this can do, is just try to be helpful. Sometimes just try and explain where people are going wrong without just shouting at them.
Yeah, I think one thing that's helped with that, honestly, it sounds bad, but I think like some of the drama discords have actually helped with that stuff as well, because whilst they can be very toxic, you have a lot more interaction between a lot of players. Whereas historically, players would be in their house, they'd be on their house Discord. There weren't many shared Discords around there where people could talk to each other. And there's a few Discords that I'm on now, like the Drama Discord. There's another Discord full of vets in there as well I'm on, where just a lot of people from different houses and stuff just talk to each other, share screenshots, talk about stuff about the game. And that has helped a lot with that as well, which I don't think the game really has that feature, because the official Discord, you can talk on it. I've jumped on there a few times, tried to answer some questions, but it doesn't really get very far. People don't do that much in there. And even looking at sort of the content creator side of it with streaming, I need to stream more regularly, because I'm not very regular with it at all, but there's not much of a there's not much of a viewer base there. You'll see most people streaming ConquerorsBlade will have 20 maybe viewers max. Sometimes people can get more than that. Drops do help when they come out. But even with that, I've had it where I've been streaming, I've had new players come on and be like, oh, what about this, what about that? And you do get some interaction there. But it's not at the level that we really need for the game to go in the right direction, which is where I think we are missing those training houses, so to speak, with vets that will actually sit down and help these players. Because I remember when I first started, I trained up a lot of people when I first started, because I was playing the game so much, and even just the thing of the old rebel camps, because they were quite difficult back in the day, because you didn't have tier 5 units, you barely had tier 4s. And I taught so many people how to be able to do those, and where you had to wall off, where you had to put your units to be able to farm, going ahead of the time to kill the siege, all that kind of stuff. You don't count this point until you've done that. All those little things. I absolutely loved training people how to do that. It was so much fun. And that's why I think I will probably make a training house at some point, but I just don't want to do it at the moment. But that's what the game needs, is these houses that have people that are willing to train other people up.
Yeah.
Would it be an option to say, in this locked region where you have a level cap of 200, within that you have some nominated members of the community that are there specifically to kind of like show people the ropes? Would that?
It's just
I'm trying to think of
how would you code that? How would you police that? How would you stop people from just going in? Because like, how could they say, for example, Temple Shop will give you access to this region, so you can go help people out? How would they actually put that into the game?
Yeah, that's a difficulty.
It is, yeah.
I think it all comes down to actually how easy are these things to implement. And if you've got the resources this is one of the things about the game, that it has so much potential. Fundamentally, it's a phenomenal game, but it's the way in which it's executed that it's lacking at times. And if we look at the world map, if you've ever like scrolled out from it, you scroll out once and you get like a wider view, and you scroll out again and then you get the map. But as you transition from the wider view to the map, you have the entire world laid out, the entire region you're in laid out in front of you, and you can see everything moving around, but you only see it for about a second, and then you pop into this cartoon map. Like, it's got the resources there, but it's almost choosing not to use them, It's done so much hard work early, and then has chosen an easy option, and it's got so much potential, and it just needs to implement it slightly differently to how it is now.
Yeah,
I think that's just a running thought with most veterans of this game, right? This game has such huge potential to be a really, really fun and top level game, but it's just certain small things over history that's held it back. The whole thing was server issues early on in the game that wasn't dealt with and wasn't even addressed until about season 9 or 10. You know, it was like the CMs were just ignoring it. They just wouldn't react to it. They wouldn't give any kind of thought on it. And then they finally addressed it. Things have gotten a lot better now. Like, I don't see as many server issues now, or if the many at all, compared to historically. You'd have like every other siege something would happen, someone would crash, someone would, things would happen like that.
It used to be really bad, and as you say, they ignored it because the potential it wasn't there. It's very frustrating.
I mean, there are still issues with server desync, but that's another topic. But like, you'll knock someone down on your screen, that they fall over to your right, but then on their screen they're in front of you, so when they get up they teleport. There's still that issue occasionally, but it's not as prevalent as it used to be. It used to be almost every time you knock someone down, they disappear and appear somewhere else. So I think we kind of want to sort of round it up now and sort of summarize.
I've got a list of I think key questions that we should answer, and that will be kind of our main takeaways from this. And I think the first one is, what do we like? What do we like currently that is being done reasonably well? And if we had the opportunity to have more of it, what would that be?
I mean, I think it's quite an all-round thing to say that it's the whole game that's improving. I like the diversity of units. We talked about Falcos. They change game mechanics. They change the way things are played. You've got flames, coconut throwers, different types of pikes. We're not just Imperial Pike Guard anymore. Different types of cavalry, lots of different infantry combinations. You've got the Romans, not particularly strong in melee, but a great shield brush which can break through things. We've got Imperial Shield Guards, which are now finally actually good shields after about 3 years. So, I really like that diversity that we finally sort of seem to be getting into the game now. They need to be quicker on the balance, but the diversity as a whole, I think, is what's starting to make the game interesting. And then as we add that into things like, as Temple just mentioned, improved servers, a better new player experience, it starts to produce a more well-rounded game than it's ever been before.
What do you think,
Temple? I definitely agree with you on that. I think the overall balance of the game is very good moment. One of the things I actually do like at the moment is the events they brought in. The recent events they've done the last couple of seasons have genuinely been really good. I mean, some of them do get a bit tedious when you've got to do them like daily, for example, but overall the events themselves have been fun. It's been new, like even with the Riot Act that's come in, that was a completely new thing they've never done before. And yeah, it had some aspects of like deathmatch in there, but it was just something completely new. Completely different play styles, different abilities. You would get a lot of the escape abilities, all that kind of stuff. It brought in a lot of variations to the game. It brought people playing light armors that a lot of people that had played heavier the whole time had never done before, which has then been really healthy for the game as well. So I think for me, it's the events that have been really, really good. What about yourself, Jason?
I really like what they've done with the custom lobbies. I think features like that have completely changed how the end game content for players like myself. Like, I come from a very sporty background, and I want that competitive itch scratched. So when I first joined, ranked wasn't a thing. They introduced ranked. They then introduced the custom lobbies, which matched up with then people like Bird of Kin going, let's do this tournament, and then CB picking it up and doing a pretty decent, like actually a phenomenal job on running CBR, given everything that he's had to go through. So the opportunities to kind of listen to what the community has asked for, like we asked for custom lobbies for ages, and then when it finally arrived and the product, as Evo's point was, on day one worked, we were then able to really enjoy it, and it enabled a whole new level of game for us, and it was really fun. And then the tournaments that came in as well. We waited a while for another CBL, but I think it was well worth the wait.
Yeah, definitely. This last CBL was very successful, I would say. I do think there's still work they can do with the custom lobbies. I think there's definitely some things they can do to improve it, but it is such a good thing that they introduced, so healthy for the game. Like you said, all these tournaments, I think a lot of the player base would have left if it wasn't for all these fan-made tournaments. They kept a lot of people engaged in this game at a high competitive level.
Okay, so
really good
that's things we like. What would you say things that we dislike, and we would look to change, remove, or reintroduce even? I think those three options give us plenty of scope.
I suppose, I guess I'll answer it in two parts for me. I guess it's not really an in-game thing, but it's the lack of marketing, like we talked about. It doesn't matter how good we make the balance, it doesn't matter how polished we make the game. If no one plays it, it's kind of irrelevant. And I think that also cuts in with things like the CBL. Why is it taking so long to have a second one? It was obviously popular the first time, and yet there's such that gap between them. Tournaments like that, trying to get the game into an esports place is really an obvious route to go. It's clearly a good competitive game that can be played competitively. Why haven't they pushed that more? They have on Frontier, they should be over here. It's an easy thing.
Especially when it was cried out for so much by the player base as well. That was probably one of the things they cried about the most. I mean, we even had teams that would go to the Asian CBL and compete there because there wasn't the option here. Like, I myself went and entered one of the Asian CBLs. There was a couple of other teams entered it as well because it wasn't here. And that was playing at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon because there wasn't any other option.
And sure, there's a cost associated with running it. They did bring in people at the back end I was one of the commentators there, so I saw a little bit of the back end side of things. But it's not that much in the grand scheme of the marketing that they get associated with it and the overall results. So really hope that they follow up with that. Something, I guess, I keep adding this pressure, but I will keep doing that as well. I hope they continue to do it. And then I guess it's a little bit more thought around the speed of balance is probably my in-game thing that I am annoyed at the most. I don't mind balancing mistakes. They can make mistakes. They're not perfect. It's very hard to balance things. A lot of units are balanced on a knife edge, and one slight error and it suddenly becomes massive over or underpowered. But it's the speed of fixing those mistakes which is frustrating. It doesn't need to take a whole season to adjust a unit balance that is off.
I know you might not have thought about this, but it's definitely a problem. It's the speed at which things changed. Any ideas what a potential solution could be from us as players to that? Would introducing channels of feedback, would having focus groups be a thing? Because everyone's got their personal bias.
From my experience, they have that channel of feedback. They have the content creators. They have a lot of people. They even got mods will give them that feedback as well. So I feel like they have those feedback channels there. It's just, is the issue on my game side where they're not giving that feedback properly to Booming, or is the issue that they give it to Booming and Booming just don't action it?
We saw a spell where, how to phrase it, where, say, I knew Booming had a different balancing director for a while, and we saw a lot more statistical balancing introduced. And I think that was even reflected on some of the balancing articles that got released. Which
because they released the ones of statistically what's the most played class, what's the most played unit, all that kind of stuff.
Why certain units were being adjusted. And I did quite like that. I thought that was a nice way of representing it. And it comes back to what we talked on very briefly earlier, that when you give out information freely and be clear, it makes a lot more sense. And people go, oh, I see why you're changing that now. That kind of makes sense. And it makes it a lot more of a rules-based balance approach because
it's more tangible, isn't it? It's like, maybe I don't agree with it, but I can see why you've done it.
Yeah, and I think that was nice. And I think for that period, we also saw slightly quicker balance changes. And I think it's now perhaps changed staff who's in charge of balancing, should we say. And that's perhaps an approach that maybe needs to be, some lessons could be learned from the previous changes, because I think they were actually very good.
Yeah, brilliant suggestion. Temple.
Yeah, I guess things. Yeah, I mean, marketing is one of the biggest ones, isn't it? Really, just the player base overall is one of the biggest issues that I have with the game. And the second one for me is matchmaking, but that will be alleviated if the player base was higher.
Right.
So I think those are my two biggest issues really with the game at the moment. Because I think overall, I mean, I agree with most things. Well, pretty much everything you said as well. Even about balancing times and things like that as well. But I think the two biggest ones for me are the matchmaking and the player base.
I'm in complete agreement with both of you.
Without the player base, can you?
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's just not the numbers currently to fix that, which is a big problem.
I think if we have a advertising campaign, I would, like, my biggest encouragement would be involve the content creators who are knowledgeable and can give new players a boost. Because either you have to fundamentally change how new players experience the game, but then you can't balance it with old players, such as you have it much quicker now to get old seasonal units versus what it is currently, and then that probably makes it slightly redundant. You'll make less money, things like that. So I think there needs to either be a way for players to learn easier, and I think that is through knowledge, hand down. I don't think that's through guides or anything like that, because guides quickly become outdated, as we see when every new season, every new rune, every new doctrine, every new veterancy and balance changes as well. things or new units go flavor of the month to never played within a patch in some cases. I think marketing is a huge thing, and the way in which they strategize that to bring and keep new players, to transition from level 120 to level 2000, that's a long way. That's a long time. Something needs to be done to keep that. I think we've almost all in agreement that that's kind of what the focus should be, if there was anything from. But that's for like more towards my games' actions and more towards the new player experience. But for veterans, what do you think they should focus on for us? Like we mentioned new events, we mentioned new specific donation kind of style, like for the vault keys or treaties.
I honestly think they're heading in the right direction for the vets. You know, it's these quests that are encouraging you to play more. It's these events that are encouraging you to play more. All of those things are a very good thing for veterans. With the right mindset. I think a lot of veterans, it's just gotten too late for that, and they're just like, well, what's the point? And I think it's the state of Territory Wars as well, because that is a big draw for a lot of people, is that Territory Wars is kind of dead on most servers. It's just one alliance that holds the entire map, basically. But is that down to us as players to fix? Is that down to the developers to try and fix? You know, there's a lot there, but I think they're definitely heading in the right direction.
We'll talk about that in a later episode.
Yeah.
A later episode, we'll talk about that.
For me, they're definitely doing the right thing for veterans at the moment. It's getting in that right direction.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I really would agree.
I'd say that's a nice wrap, to be honest. I think we've touched upon everything. Evo, thank you very much. Great insight as well as fun stories. So thank you very much for your time.
Been a pleasure.
And yeah,
would you like to shout out your socials?
Yeah, please do.
Oh, God, well, if you Google anything related to ConquerorsBlade on YouTube, you're almost certainly going to bump into me. But yeah, Evo Loz Gaming on YouTube. I do have a Twitter somewhere, but I only log on once every 6 weeks. So probably best just to go for the YouTube.
So thanks for listening, everyone. We're looking forward to the next episode where we talk about the new player experience with special guest Plumshin. So if you do have any feedback or suggestions for future topics, please do leave a comment below. Don't forget to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell.